Yeah, I have to do more to to get the stuff up on various platforms, but I haven't gotten around to it. Okay. Good. So we go on to say that the harp was hanging over David's bed. When the night came, Baruch Tzefonis, the north wind would come. We discussed this extensively the other day, and it would blow. It would blow the north wind would blow, and it would make the harp, and it would make the harp sing, and okay, 1 minute, please. Sorry. It would make the harp sing, and he would wake up, and that's how he knew to wake up at midnight. He immediately would get up, osek the Torah, and study Torah ad sha'olam shachar, until the morning, until the first light of morning. Kivin sha'olam shachar, the first light of morning. Nichnesu chachmei Yisrael etzlo, the sages of Israel would come to Amrlo, and they would say, Adonenu Hamelech, our master, the king, Amcha Yisrael tzrichim parnasa. The Jewish people need business. Amr lehem lechuvis barn suzam, go make business from each other, engage in business, buy and sell, and derive sustenance from each other. Amrlo, they told him, Ein hakometz must be a sari. A little handful doesn't satisfy a lion. A lion needs to eat a lot. And if you empty out a pit and you put the earth back in, it doesn't fill up completely. In other words, if you tamp it down, you end up having less in the pit than when you started. And the idea is that you can't grow an economy just from what's already there. You have to increase
production.
Right.
Production doesn't enter into it. So it's either conquest or being a middleman.
Right. So Amr Lahem, so you can't just buy and sell, you need to increase the GDP. So how do you increase the GDP? Amr Lachu, go wage war, go conquer new lands. That's the way to increase your GDP.
Doesn't really quite imply. Gedudim was when they did guerrilla warfare. It's like when they did raids. It wasn't so much conquered territory. When you said, like when they would talk about in Tanakh and in Malachim and in Navi, they would have the neighboring
It's usually an attack.
Send raiding parties, and you had stories where they would take, like the story of the shifcha that they would the maid that they brought back,
right,
who told her master Naaman that there's a Navi who can cure you of Yitzuras. That would be described as a gedud, a raid. Here they're translating it more as, Well,
how does Sefaria translate it?
Here he just says, go and take up arms with the troops in battle in order to expand our borders and provide our people with the opportunity. That's a bit of, I wonder, he must get it from some commentaries here. See
what's the Hebrew word?
Rashi.
What, Joe?
What's the Hebrew word that we're talking about?
Gedud.
Gedud.
Gedud or gedud? Gedud.
Gedud means an army. It means a troop. Right.
No, a gedud is a good size, a few thousand
unit.
People.
Yes.
That's in modern Hebrew.
Right, but it does mean a troop.
It's like a brigadier.
That's modern Hebrew. I don't know that it really.
Right. No, but gedud does mean a significantly sized troop. I don't know what size.
Yeah, that's like, anyway,
that's a bit today.
Rashi.
So let's talk about so let's talk about Tosfot. So there's a Tosfot here that says very interesting. It says, what does it mean? What does it mean? Because his idea was that the rich should give to the poor. So the answer is, so Rabbeinu Tam says, Chulyoso means the water. If you get groundwater in a pit, usually it doesn't fill up the pit completely. And Rabbeinu Yitzchak of Korbil, which is a station on the way from Paris, I It's so funny. I was going to visit my son in Brunois, which is in the yeshiva in the outer outskirts of Paris. And I passed through these stations. Each one of them is a place where one of the Tosafists lived, 800 years ago. Very interesting. At any rate, so Rabbeinu Yitzchak of Krabil says that if you dig a hole, right, and if you dig on one side and put it on the other side, you won't fill it. Why? Because now you have another hole. In other words, it means to say, let's say you dig a hole, right? You dig in the ground. Yeah, you have a hole in the ground, and you dig into the pit to fill it. You won't fill it because the hole in the pit gets bigger. Which makes the most sense. It's the most logical. In other words, you're in a pit, right? And I want to fill it. So you can't dig in the hole to fill the hole because the hole just gets deeper. So his argument is you can't just take from the rich and give to the poor because in the end, the rich won't have. You have to increase the GDP. You can't just redistribute. Communism doesn't work. So,
exactly.
Now, so how did they increase GDP? Michael rightfully points out that the term gedud usually in the Tanakh means a raid to get stuff. But I'm going to take a look at the Marsha and see what the Marsha says.
That's what I was just trying to figure out actually.
Let's see what the Marshui says. I mean, by the way, Safari is getting better. They do have access to many of the
They don't
Mefarshim.
have anything on the chart. Shita Mukubetzis doesn't say anything either.
No, Shita Kubetzis doesn't usually comment on Agoda. That's the thing.
Yeah. So,
No, and I don't have I can get the Biniyahu on my on Hebrew books or on my Otzar. I just don't have when I have my computer here, I can connect the Otzar. But
nobody really comments from what I'm seeing. The ones that he
Right.
has available here.
Okay.
But just interesting observation that they all give that translation of going out to war and expanding
Territory.
the territory, where this sounds more like banditry. It sounds more like banditry. This is what when it says they would have a gedudim in Malachim. That's usually what it meant. Banditry. At least one of the surrounding nations did it.
Because legaded, I think, has a different meaning as a verb.
Yeah. By the way, the Rabbeinu Nissim says, we have to add from another place. That doesn't indicate territory. That indicates, spoiling. Okay. Miyad immediately Yoetzim b'Achitofel. So the 3 lines from the bottom, he immediately would go and take advice from Achitofel. Achitofel, before he betrayed David, was this brilliant guy. He's the classic example of someone who ultimately was too clever for themselves. And Achitofel would advise them how to go to war.
It was Rabbi Mufak.
Right. They would take advice from Achitofel, and consult with the Sanhedrin. Advice from Achitofel how to wage war, and from the Sanhedrin as to what kind of war is permitted to raise. In other words, you don't start up with everyone, you start up with people who are your enemies. And
who is Achitofel
rules.
Who is Achitofel in Melachim?
Achitofel appears mostly in Shmuel Bet. He was David's advisor who then went over to Avshalom.
Oh, that's what I thought.
And then he committed suicide because he felt embarrassed when David won. V'sholim b'urim v'tumim, and they asked the Urim v'tumim. So before the Jewish people went to war, they would ask of the Urim v'tumim, which was the breastplate of the high priest, that you could ask questions of national import and you would get answers. It was the ultimate AI. Omer Rav Yosef, Mikra, what does the pasuk say? The Achrei Achitofel. What is the meaning of the pasuk and after Achitofel? This is in Divrei Hayamim. King David's advisors was Beniyo ben Yehoyada, Vavi who was the high priest, and the Sar Tzavol Melech Yoav. Achitofel Zayoetz. Achitofel was the advisor, like it says Va'achatz Achitofel Sheyomim, that the advice of Achitofel in those days before he betrayed David, as if a man would ask in the words of God. Binyahu ben Yehoyada was the Sanhedrin, because by tradition, Binyahu, who we have listed in Melachim and Divrei Hayamim as a great warrior, was also the great warrior in halacha. He is the and the Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Yosef Chaim of Baghdad, felt that he was a Gilgal of Bnei Ben Yada. That's why his Sfarim are named after him. Vaviyatar Elu Urim V'Tumim, and Aviyatar, the high priestess, the Urim V'Tumim. So you take practical advice from Achitophel, halachic advice from the Sanhedrin, and divine advice from the Urim V'Tumim. Because just something is halachically permissible doesn't mean you'll succeed. The Urim V'Tumim, where the Kohen Gadol would go into the Holy of Holies, and you would ask him the question, and the Urim V'Tumim would light up, would give us the example. By the way, the Rambam says not they lit up, but that the letters would project like a hologram in front of him, and he would know what they meant. In other words, before they went to war, they took practical advice, they took halachic advice, and then they took prophetic advice as to whether they would succeed or not. Because practicality isn't always halachically permitted, and what's halachically permitted doesn't always work. So they took a threefold approach to make sure that they would succeed in war. The Chenu Omer, and it says, Yanu ben Yada was on the crazy uplesi. Now, what is the plain meaning of crazy uplesi?
This is his personal guard. His equivalent of the Praetorian Guard.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy or placy?
What crazy uplesi? What is the actual meaning?
That's French.
We're on 4A, by the way, now. Okay, but what does actual crazy uplesi mean? That's what I want to know. So we know he's going to explain that it means the Sanhedrin in the battle of Torah, but I want to know what the actual meaning is.
Usually it's translated, to look it up right now. I think it usually means the personal guard.
Yeah, but there must be another
meaning of the words,
too.
you mean? Yeah, you have it.
It's in Divrei Yamim, right?
No, in Shmuel. In
Shmuel, okay.
It's right here. It's in Shmuel. Here.
I got a Shmuel here.
Shmuel Bays, chapter 20, verse 23.
Let's
Shmuel
see.
Bays.
Yeah. Shmuel Bet. What parak?
Parak 20.
Okay, got it.
Verse
Yeah.
verse 23.
Okay, there we are. Yeah. Ala kreti vala pleti. So kreti o pleti. So the Targum says on the archers and the slingers. That's the simple. Kreti is archers. Now why? Let's see what the Sudat Tzion says.
Kreti und pleti.
Kreti u pleti.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see.
Let's speak his lingo.
The kreti u pleti. Okay. So that's what that's what he says. Okay.
So what are these names? What is it?
No, so kreti u pleti means the slingers, the archers, and the slingers.
Oh, archers and slingers.
Rashi says in Kreti. Is that the first place?
Oh,
That is
you know where it comes from? It comes from the word liflot.
Right.
To liflot is.
Yeah. Right. So kreti u pleti both means to to spit something out.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that we find throughout Jewish history that they relied a lot on archers and and slings. They relied a lot on weapons from a distance because it's a force multiplier. That is how Bar Kokhba's successful battles were when he holed up in the hills and bombarded the Romans with rocks and arrows. Because the Romans were really good at close combat. No one could beat them. But from a distance, they could be worn down. That's why the Parthians were able to defeat them.
It has some of these authorities claiming that they're actually ethnic designations, and that the Kreti.
Where are we reading this from? This
I'm reading this just from Wiki. It's different. Who's he quoting for this? scholar, the group is described as the children of the Crazy. That's one description. One translation has that as Cretans, which is usually translated as Kaftar. Cretan, it was at Cyprus is Kaftar.
Right.
Cyprus is Kaftar.
So these were like mercenaries.
Paralleling an ancient tradition that the origin of the peoples had also come from Crete.
Liflot, Rabbi.
Most modern scholars believe was probably identical to. I always thought Kaftar was Cyprus.
Morning.
Just
Are they here?
they're here. Well, it looks like the chef is not there because she.
Yeah, but
Probably
but everything. Just make sure they use the milchik side.
I just wanted to make sure which status it was.
It's milchik, and check everything they bring in should be in 2 or 3 boxes with my tape. I went there yesterday, and and look at all the ingredients. If any questions, find me or call me.
It's called Stam, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They saw here one ethnic designation is Cretan refers to Cretans, and place refers to what we call refers to Plishtim.
Interesting.
Plishtim, yeah.
So I guess I know because David conquered the Plishtim. Maybe he had mercenary. Who knows? But the Targum Yonatan. Remember, the Targum Yonatan ben Uziel is from before the destruction of the temple, from like 100 BCE or 50 BC. Targum Yonatan is very old, and the Targum on the Tanakh is Targum on the Nach is Targum Yonatan. Targum Yonatan says the archers. However, the Gemara says that it's a euphemism for the Sanhedrin. Al Krasi, Ploma Nikra Shemam Krasi Uplasi, Krati Shakorsim Devrayim, that their words are cut, they're emphatic and what's the word?
Emphatic?
Not just emphatic, Korsim, you cut, they
decisive.
Decisive, yes, thank you. Devrayim and Plasi Shemafloim Devrayim, that they were wondrous in their words. In other words, their words were both concise, precise, and deep. In other words, they said exactly what needed to say, but they were also extremely deep. So Krati Uplati is a euphemism. What, Joe?
The word liflot would be like when you send a torpedo out of a submarine toward a ship, is like launching it.
Right, but here we say this means the Sanhedrin, that their words were wondrous and their words were precise. So this is, in other words, that Ben Yoda was the head of the Sanhedrin. So, by the way, you should know the Mishnah Lamelech, who was one of the great commentators on the Rambam and great rabbinic leader of Jews in the Ottoman Empire. So Yehuda Razanis. So the Mishnah Lamelech was also an admiral in the Ottoman Navy. So sometimes greatness in Torah and military things comes together. And by the way, there's a good number of officers in the Israeli army today who are graduates of Hester Yeshivot, who are big Talmidei Chachamim. Who's the guy who got into trouble the 2014 Gaza war for comparing the Gazans to the Philistines? He gave them the same drasha that David did to Shaul. Oh, Winter. So Winter, who's a brigadier general, is also quite a Talmud Chacham. Anyways, and then the general of the king Yoav. Some say it's Rabbi Yitzchak Ba'ad, others say it's Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Rabbi, who are two different peoples. Mikra, what does the pasuk mean? Ura kavodi, ura hanevel v'chino ira shachar. Awake, my glory. Awake with the navel is a harp that's strung over a drum, basically a early guitar. The kinor and the harp, ira shachar, I shall awake in the morning.
That's a well-known song.
Yes, right. Yes.
Let's have a rendition.
Yeah. Right. Sing that in Pirkei. Rabbi Zera says, one second. So Rabbi Yitzchak already says this is what the pasuk means. I shall awaken it. So Rabbi Zera says that I'll awake in the morning. Rabbi Zera says Moshe liolam havayada. Moshe always knew, and David also knew. And since David, really that Moshe and David knew by divine inspiration when it was night. And since David knew, what did he need a kinor for? To waken up from his sleep. And since Moshe knew, why did he have to say a kechatzos around midnight? Moshe thought maybe Paro's astronomers would make an error because their astronomy was imperfect. And therefore, really, Moshe knew by Ruach HaKodesh when midnight was. But he was worried that Paro wouldn't know and say, Moshe, you made a mistake. And he'll say, Moshe is a liar. The Omar Mar, we have said earlier, it has been said in Mesechtes Derech Eretz, which is one of the short little Mesechtes, as they're called, that are D'Braita, L'mad l'shonecha lomer eni yedea, shema tidbada. Teach your tongue to say, I don't know, lest you be caught in a lie, which means to say that you should teach yourself to say you don't know, even if you know, if the person you're talking to can't establish that what you're saying is the truth. But tochas, and you be caught.
Well, I don't know if it means to say you don't know, because you're not certain.
Right,
can always
yeah.
say I'm not certain.
Right,
It's something that's not.
That is a
amenable.
very good point. That's a very good point. Any idea means I don't know, means to say I don't know for sure. Now there's so they knew when it was. That's an interesting interesting story. That one Friday night, Reb Levi Yitzchak was Lubavitcher Rebbe's father, and young Mendel, as he was known then, were walking home from shul, and someone approached them and asked them the time. So Reb Leivik said, I don't wear a watch on Shabbat, but he turned to his son, who was like 12, 13 at the time, and says, Mendel, tell us what time it is. And he looked up at the stars,
7:13,
and he gave him, I don't know to the minute, but he gave him a time. Because obviously, if it's a clear night and you know your constellations and so on, you can know what time it was. But astronomy is interesting. Astronomy was always an interest of that family, the whole family. It's anyways, but you obviously cannot know to the minute.
Of all the sciences, it appeals to people who are mathematically inclined. It has practical applications in Talmudic studies.
Yeah.
It's always.
Well, yeah, and by the way, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's brother was a mathematician by trade.
Right, he's died tragically young.
Yes, very young, and
40s.
Well, he was
50s.
born in 1904 and passed away in like 1952.
Yes, he was not quite 50.
Not quite 50. Yeah,
He was in England at the time. I
yeah,
think.
he was in England, but he's buried in Israel. But he was in England at the time.
Never married.
No, he was married.
Oh, he was married?
He's married. He had a daughter, and the daughter has children and grandchildren. The story goes. So the story goes that at some point in the 60s or the early 70s, the Rebbe's niece came to visit him, and she rented a little sports car. So she took the Rebbe home in his little convertible. A very famous story. Anyways,
No
but-
issue of yichud with a niece.
it's a
It's
convertible.
open, yeah.
There is an issue of yichud with a niece.
There is an issue, but if it's
Yichud
open
is with
convertible,
anyone but
it's not-
a mother, a daughter, and a sister. But the Ramah says, the Shulchan Aruch says that a person should that an unmarried brother and sister shouldn't live together on a permanent basis, because it doesn't look right. At any rate, but be that as it may, yeah, it's but his brother was a mathematician, and I know from several people in the sciences that the Rebbe was very, very knowledgeable in advanced mathematics. Rabbi Soloveitchik, his field was philosophy. He was a tremendous philosopher, and they were all in Berlin together. Putner,
So there were different opinions. It's amazing though, because they have different quotes. They have quotes, I forget the details, but he goes over it in the book, the Rebbe, Telushkin goes over
Yeah.
it. Somebody was quoted as saying that one of the two of them said he didn't know the other one. Was it Soloveitchik who said that? They
So
had to-
Soloveitchik definitely, because
they had-
Soloveitchik told
Right.
Soloveitchik told Rabbi Sachs, Olav Shalom, that about the Rebbe. Rabbi Soloveitchik, the Rav, is the one who told Sachs to go visit the Rebbe.
Mhm.
I may have been Hunter. Nechama Leibovich was also part of that group. Nechama Leibovich is there, Yitzhak Hutner. They were all there at the same time. But Nechama Leibovich later in life had a big complaint about the Rebbe.
Really?
Yeah, I'll tell you what it was. She met so Rabbi Raskin for Vermont, with a Jewish agency, organized some kind of trip for rabbis. And one of the people who spoke to them was Nechama Leibovich. So when she found out, this is like the 70s, when she found out he was a Lubavitcher, she says, I have a complaint to the Rebbe, who I knew. And he said, what is it? Says, because all one of the Rebbe's big things was the sichot, he said, on Rashi. The Rebbe took a whole new approach to Rashi. I mean, literally hundreds of talks on Rashi. So she said that they were all published in Yiddish, and she doesn't know Yiddish very well. She obviously knew it, but she's only comfortable reading things in Hebrew. So she complained that he didn't have them published in Hebrew.
She must have been raised in a Yiddish-speaking family, I'm sure.
No, she's from Germany.
Oh, they're from Germany.
And
They were
German
Yankees.
Jews typically
They
spoke
were-
German.
Yeah,
They were
were
Yankees.
Right. No,
They
she was a
must
Yekka. Yeah. So
Real
she's,
Yekka?
yeah.
Must
As far as I know, she was a
German.
People that claim to be Yekas hosts.
But whatever it was, she wasn't comfortable reading, so she had a complaint. Interestingly enough, in the 80s, they did it all over in Hebrew. Yeah. They didn't. Matter of fact, the last 8 volumes were in Hebrew. Because what happens is that right now the biggest community is in Israel, and of Chabadniks, and none of them speak Yiddish anymore.
Really?
And I mean, the Yerushalmis do, and they learn a little bit of Yiddish so they could understand, listen to the recordings of the Rebbe. But in the mid '90s in Kfar Chabad, the last Yiddish, there was one like Gemara Shir in Yiddish in the yeshiva, and that ended. Teres Emes in Yerushalayim, which still gets all the Yerushalmis, they still have a shir in Yiddish. But even Teres Emes, most of the yeshiva, most of
Born
the
in Riga, Latvia.
Well, but Latvia is all Yekis.
She was born in Riga, and then they moved to Berlin in 1990.
Yeah, but the Latvian Jews were all Yekis in their style.
Memel, you mean? Yeah.
All
They had
Yekis.
that little.
Yeah, but they're
East-
all
East Prussia
Yekis.
was there.
Because Rabbi Chodakov, who was one of the Lubavitch Rebbe's secretaries,
Yeah.
was a total Yeka in every way, including his speech and everything. And he was also from Latvia. The Latvia belonged to the Russian Empire, but ethnically it was very German, except for the native Latvians. But the Yidden tended to associate with the German speakers. Because all the Latvian Jews I know were Mordechai Dubin, who was the minister of education between the wars in Latvia, was a German speaker. The Jews there were very Germanified.
Mhm.
The Latvians didn't like Jews very much. There weren't too many Jews in Latvia, but they managed to kill almost all of them. Okay. So at any rate, going back to the stars, Vayomer Moshe B'daihu. So therefore, you should say, I'm not sure, as Michael points out, rather than be caught in what someone else sees to be a lie. Because one should make sure that your words are not just true, but are seen as being true. Rav Ashi Lamar, so Rav Ashi now says that Bepalga Orta the place or Nagi Arbesa. That he told him the night that go Havakoi. In other words, it was the night of the 13th of Nisan going to the 14th that Moshe was speaking. And Moshe told to the Jewish people, God says tomorrow, like midnight, like tonight. In other words, it's not that he said about midnight. In other words, Moshe is talking to the Jewish people at midnight between the 13th and 14th of Nisan. And he says, like this midnight, tomorrow night between the 14th and the 15th, the night of the Seder, I'm going to kill the firstborn. So Rav Ashi argues that this isn't a like Chatzot around Chatzot, but it's Chatzot like the midnight we're at now, where Moshe is speaking to them a day before the night of B'dikat Chometz. So at this same time, in 24 hours, God is going to destroy the Egyptians. So Rashi rejects the idea that Chatzot is approximate and accepts that Moshe may, not only did Moshe know when midnight was, but he was perfectly happy to tell Paro midnight. And we don't worry so much about Paro making a mistake. Okay. Now, I want to tell you something interesting that Tosfot says that when we say B'niyah, this is the Sanhedrin. He says this logically because you need the army, you need the advisors, you need the Sanhedrin, you need the Kohen. So since the Sanhedrin is missing from this discussion, it says that B'niyah is that Achitophel was the advisor and Yoav was the general, and it doesn't make, and Aviasar was the Kohen. It doesn't make sense to say that B'niyah was just a minor general, because we're talking about the heads of the institutions here. So Tosfot says it's logical to say Kreti Upleti has to be the Sanhedrin because those are the main institutions. There's the government, there's the priesthood, there's the army, and there's the Sanhedrin, which is the high court and legislature. So in the list of leaders, if B'niyah was just the head of the archers of the Air Force, you know what I mean? It doesn't make sense to include him because here we're talking about David and his main advisor, and his cabinet and the chief of staff and so on. What is the guy in charge of the archers showing up? So it must be a major institution. The major institution that's missing from this verse is, so Tosfot said, it's not that we know the Kreti Upleti is the Sanhedrin. We logically know that the Kreti Upleti must be the Sanhedrin. Then we try to find out why we call them the Kreti Upleti. But that's inherently logical in the structure of the ancient Jewish Commonwealth to demand that B'niyah have some leadership role. So, so Tosfot said this isn't just a midrash we pulled out of the air, that we do the midrashic thing because it's logical in the context of the structure of the pasuk and the kinds of people and their positions that we're talking about. Okay. So that ends the discussion of time. Now we're going to go, because we're already talking about David, the Gemara is going to go into a long series of discussions about David. And we're going to do that, Mitzvah Shem, on Thursday. Thank you all for joining us. Sorry we went a little bit over. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care. All the best.